Hey, this is Monica Sanford. Welcome to Vantage Point. This is a podcast where I'll be talking with community leaders and subject matter experts, giving all their views on issues that will be affecting you. I used to be an MMA judge for the Georgia Boxing Commission, so I respect all views of all the action, hard-hitting, hard-button topics. So let's get started with the action today. I am so happy to have Chief Deputy Chip Simmons. I know he's super busy, and if you have lived anywhere in Pensacola the past 30 plus years, you have seen him and known him. He's been in public service and law enforcement. His law enforcement career began in 1984 as a corrections officer for Escambia County, then with the police department in 1986, and on to the police chief until he retired from the department in 2015. He has worked in patrol on investigations, narcotics, and SWAT, and previously assistant county administrator for Escambia County. I actually wanted to put in there that you were in the leadership Pensacola class in 2004.
2004, yes.
Yeah, because I am actually starting my leadership class tomorrow.
Oh, good for you.
I'm in the new leadership class. So
very well.
But also, you will see him everywhere. He's done everything for Ronald McDonald House, Man a Food Bank, and on and on and on. He is very involved in community and community engagements. He has received the highest award for heroism and received a Bronze Cross and a Gold Medal of Valor. So, wanted to go ahead and get started with all the action. First, Chip Simmons, what is your current role that you serve today?
Well, thank you. I really appreciate being here. I like the setup you have. My current role, I'm the Chief Deputy over Operations. Escambia County Sheriff's Office is a large organization and is divided into two parts, basically. One is Operations, which includes uniform patrol, investigations, SWAT, narcotics, high-intensity patrol, and all that sort of stuff. And then there is an administrative side, which we have another Chief Deputy over, and that includes dispatch and civil and a lot of the support services at the Sheriff's Office. So basically, I'm doing what I've done all my career, wearing a uniform, concentrating on patrol efforts and investigative efforts.
Oh, cool. So speaking of investigative efforts, we have this past June and July has been, it seems, and it appears to have an uptick in gun violence. From June, there were 6 shootings in 8 days, the Platinum Club, Myrtle Grove, Navy Boulevard, and then, of course, the most recent one that I know is under investigation, so we won't get too far into that. But the recent shootings, has there been an uptick? Has it just appeared that way, or what's kind of going on from your viewpoint?
Well, I think if you look at it statistically, we always have an uptick in the summer months. Whether it's the heat, whether it's the kids are out of school, whether there's more functions, I don't know if I can pinpoint it, but I can tell you that typically around May, June, it starts to be an uptick in violent crime. And so statistically, I would say that we're on par. But if you look at it, if you're the one that's involved in it, or if it hits close to home, then you say, I don't care about statistics. I care about myself and the safety of me and my family. So, and sometimes we have these, I call it a little rash of shootings. In this particular case, we had a couple of them, 3 or 4 in the county. I think the city had 2 of them during that time period. So, and the media reported on all of them because they were kind of unique. And I know that the one that happened in the city.
Were all these related? Are they more gun violence and gang violence, or domestic disputes, or drug related?
I think when you first get the report of a shooting incident or a homicide, the first thing you look at is, was it random? Or is it related to another, crime or another homicide? When we looked at the ones that we have jurisdiction over, we determined that 4 of the shootings were related to 2 different groups. So I guess I could say that of ours, 2 of them, 2 were related, and the other 4 were not related. So we were able to make arrests in almost all but one of the cases that we had, and we're still working on all of them. So again, whenever you get the report of a crime or a homicide, you look and see, is it related? And there are some relations to some of the ones that we had, a couple of the ones that we had.
Okay, and speaking of your jurisdiction, how do you determine where your police presence is, not based on just the calls, those homicides or things like that, but overall your jurisdiction? How do you determine where is it, how they're distributed? Is it random? Is it concentrated in certain areas? Is it based on 911 calls? What exactly is your protocol?
Yeah, well, simply put, we patrol the unincorporated area of Escambia County. So, as you know, the Pensacola Police Department, which I was at for almost 30 years, handles the incorporated or the city limits. And then amongst the county, what we do is it's based on a calls for service. As you can imagine, Escambia County is rather large, and we have some very rural areas and we have some very urban areas. So we have two beaches, Perdido and Pensacola Beach. So our precinct or our beat structure is such it takes two things into consideration. One is geography, and the second thing is simply calls for service. We have to get to Pensacola Beach, we would have to go through the city limits, over a bridge, through Gulf Breeze, over another bridge, and into the Pensacola Beach area. So it wouldn't make any sense for us not to have someone stationed out there permanently. So we have a precinct or a substation at the beach. And then we basically, years ago, before I even came to the sheriff's office, they took a look at and they determined that these areas have a larger call volume. And so those beats have to be smaller because we have one deputy assigned to each beat. So what you'll see is in the central part of Escambia County, you'll have the beats that are smaller because we would have the need for more deputies in those areas. But in the more rural areas, Century, a little south of Century, then our beats would be a lot bigger, or our structure would be a little.
So with that more concentrated area, do you have more concentrated calls? I mean, you're just going to have, based on you have so many people.
The more urban the area, the more concentrated calls. Yes.
Okay. So do you know the number of deputies you have altogether to cover all of Escambia County? Do you know the number of deputies? And tailed on to that question, do you know the number of minorities that are in the Escambia County?
I do, and as like any agency, that fluctuates. We lost a deputy just this morning. I got word of a deputy, but we're hiring, them by the dozen. So the numbers that we have allocated are in the area of 425, but we're at about 375 now. But again, we also have a lot of them that are in rookie school. Or they're in a various stage of training, which is, again, it could be rookie school or police academy, depends on what you want to call it, or they could be in field training, a program that lasts, there's 4 phases to it, and then we have, ultimately you have a deputy get out there on the road by himself. So our numbers right now that are out there, the deputies that are out there on the street patrolling on their own, is about 375. The percentage of minorities is around 15% at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. Do
you know, staying with kind of demographics of, and you may or may not have the answers to this or the question, the percentage-wise, but the number of incarcerated inmates now, demographics-wise, how many are minorities and how many are just drug-related, if that is your number one arrest around here, or is it drugs plus another violent crime? So what would you say actually is, the demographics that are incarcerated, but also your number one public safety concern for Pensacola?
Well, yeah, obviously there's a lot there. I think that the number one public safety concern is violent crime. But it's interwoven with narcotics, and if, as you read some of it, most of my experience is in the narcotics field, working in task forces, operations, and undercover capacity, and then as a supervisor and ultimately the commander of the drug unit, but also in SWAT. So I've experience basically in drugs and in violent crime, and which I think is appropriate because that to me is a connection amongst much of this violent crime. We will put information out that we've had this shooting or that shooting, and almost every time, the overwhelming majority of the time, we have to put down there, we have to acknowledge that it's drug related. These things are not random. Your question as to the jail, when I was in between the Pensacola Police Department and when I retired as a police chief and I went to Escambia County, I was the director of corrections for Escambia County for a year because I had corrections experience in the past, and I was one of the last men standing over at the county, so I took that gig as well. But I don't have the exact demographic breakdown now. But your question about whether people are there merely for drugs or for drugs plus some other combination, I guess you'd have to look at it and say, are we talking about misdemeanor drugs or are we talking about trafficking drugs? Because there's obviously on two different sides of the spectrum there. And when I was the chief corrections officer, I did a look at that. I wanted to know who was incarcerated in our jail, Escambia County Jail, and their bond was $500 or less or $1,000 or less. Because if you were just there for misdemeanor marijuana, you would not have a bond, typically would not have a bond over that amount. Because we were getting questions on, that you're just putting people in jail for a joint, for a small amount of marijuana.
That is the perception.
And that's not the case. That was not the case. I say that. That was not the case a couple of years ago when I was over the jail. Because we had programs that looked at that sort of thing, and then we had the judge. Oftentimes the judges will go back and reevaluate those, because if you stay in jail, what you do is you go to a first appearance, and then the judge will look at that and say, is the initial bond appropriate for, say, misdemeanor possession? I don't know of a single person that will stay in jail even a whole day under just misdemeanor possession of drugs. It's almost always based on they're probably still incarcerated because of a past failure to appear. Because if you don't show up for court one time, they're not going to let you out on any bond for almost anything, which you can understand that because you've proven you're not going to show up. Or it is a violation of probation based on another charge, or there's another charge. Like, you may have a misdemeanor marijuana charge to go along with your armed robbery charge, those types of things. But to say that people are in jail or incarcerated and have been incarcerated for 20 days, 30 days, simply on a misdemeanor marijuana charge, that's not accurate. It wasn't accurate a couple of years ago.
No, that's great to know. Great information. What and speaking of the narcotic gang task force that you were on, do you see? I had recently read an article in the 2017 court news article that said here in Escambia County, there's upwards now about 20 gangs. Are they becoming more organized or less organized? Is it actually even increasing? Or, what do you see the gang-related and narcotics-related activity?
Well, and again, if depends on what you want to call a gang. I would say yes. The answer is yes, that we do have a gang situation in Escambia County, but they fluctuate. We have recently we've had 2 gangs that popped up with brand new names, and they affiliate themselves with this particular neighborhood. Now, is it the Crips and Bloods? Sometimes it is. Sometimes we have people coming through here, but by and large, what we see are gangs that, again, they associate with one another based on their neighborhood or their geography. And so what they will do is they'll start up and they'll call themselves, whatever the name is, whatever neighborhood that they're from. And so we do see that, and they can be very violent. I mean, we have had a number of situations where these people, and again, it's drug related. I'll tell you right now, it is drug related. But we see people that are these gangs or these people that are associated with each other through some sort of criminal endeavor. Again, oftentimes it's drugs, sometimes it's theft to buy drugs, and they can be violent. It's not like I don't want to be dismissive and say because it's a neighborhood gang and because it's not a member of MS-13 that they can't be violent, because they can be. And we have
are these more youth? Do you have like ages of these gangs that are kind of getting more organized, or?
Yeah, I think by and large they're late teens, early 20s. A lot of times they will not really grow out of it, but they will go into a different. They don't hang out as much with the teenagers as they can. But again, I don't want people to believe that because they're 16, 17-year-olds they can't be violent or they can't be dangerous, because they very well could be.
Okay, so does that determine too kind of your geographical distribution of your policing?
That's a great question, because people have the misunderstanding that the uniform patrol that are assigned to a specific district are also the ones that investigate a homicide. What they're doing is going from call to call to call, and they're busy, responding to 911 calls. And so what we have to have in order to really give the attention that is necessary for any one neighborhood is what we'll call a high-intensity patrol unit or a TAC unit, a unit that can go to a specific area or neighborhood or be given a specific task. And in this case, it will be to kind of address some of the gang situations that we're seeing. And then we also have a gang unit that is specifically assigned to gather intelligence on these gang members, so that they can disseminate that to the high intensity patrol unit, to investigations who's working the homicide.
So we have our own gang task force here.
We have, I wouldn't say it's a task force, but we have a gang unit. We have people that are assigned so that they're not encumbered by having to go and answering calls for service. They can concentrate on the gangs, much like we do in investigations. We have someone that handles homicides, someone that handles economic crimes, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to give it the attention that they deserve.
Well, what would you think then is your view of the youth gangs and the youth violence and activity, things like that? What is the best way to avoid that? What is leading up to the violence? Are they unemployed, the disadvantages of the area, parks and recreation? What actually could be done? More lighting, more just things for
That's
these kids to do? I mean, what's like
Well, the answer
what's
is yes.
the answer?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes to all of
I
them.
think you have to take a multi-pronged approach. I think you have to primarily enforce the laws. If someone gets shot, we have to go there. We have to put the people in jail that deserve to be in jail, and we have to have the manpower that's allocated towards that end. And that's primarily, I think, what we got to do. The second thing I believe is engagement, and it kind of encompasses what you were talking about. It's whether it's at going to a church function and discussing it with the families and with the pastors of the neighborhood, or my favorite is basically mentorship. I spent a lot of time coaching youth ball over 15 years, and you sit there and you coach a group of kids that may not have a role model or a father figure, and what they're looking up to you, and you're not just calling plays. You're talking about life. You talk before and after practice. You talk before and after games. Oftentimes these mentors they take the kids to the first restaurant they've ever gone to.
Oh, wow.
I was coaching kids that have never crossed a bridge.
Oh, wow.
So when you take them over a 9 mile or over a 3 mile bridge, it's like, wow, coach, this is I've never been to Gulf Breeze.
Figuratively, you're crossing
And
bridges.
exactly. So and you have that opportunity to talk to them again about life, not just about the next play or about whether they're going to make a college play for Florida State or Florida. But you talk to them about what are you going to do if you don't get a high school education. So all that wraps up into mentorship and about caring about what happens to these kids before they become a gang member or
Were
before
they
they have
receptive
trouble.
to that, and even to the point of bringing their friends with them and
Yeah,
wanting their friends to be
absolutely.
involved?
Well, and sports is a great kind of unifier. And I was a football player myself, and growing up and in high school, and there are people that I would have never been able to associate with had I not played sports. And they're friends of mine today based on my sports activities in the past. And there are times when I'm out now, a kid will come up to me, and I know how they know me. If they call me coach, I coach with them or for them or with them. And if they call me Mr. Simmons, they probably know me from my kids. But if they call me chief, then they know me from law enforcement. So it's really a good feeling trying to figure out which team they were on.
Very
and
cool.
it's very rewarding, and it's knowing that you
What did
did
you play?
a little
What did you
part.
play in high school? Or
Football. I play football,
Football,
and,
okay.
and run a little bit of track in
My
high
husband
school.
was a quarterback in football.
Of course he was. Of course.
Yeah, but
Before he joined the Marine Corps, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, there you
But
go.
I also actually just saw a picture of you giving a high five to some kid on a baseball field, or
Right.
so I didn't know if you played baseball too, or
Yeah, I
that was
coach
very
baseball
cute.
and football, and those are part of our, I'll call it outreach, but part of the engagement I was talking about. When I came over to the sheriff's office, Sheriff Morgan liked some of the things that we did at the Pensacola Police Department. We had a youth sports camp, and we had a lot of things that we did, and so we're incorporating those at the sheriff's office as well.
All righty. So, community relations. Actually, we're going to get back to a little bit of community relations. And how do you think, first, what would be the first order of business as any new sheriff? Trying to bridge, we were just talking about bridges with young kids, but trying to bridge a feeling once you lose, and do you think you've lost any trust and confidence in certain areas of Pensacola? But how do you get back that feeling, and how are you going to bridge with all of Escambia County?
Well, let me answer that by answering it the way when I started at the police chief of Pensacola Police Department, because that's historical. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look internally and say, okay, where are we at as a police department? And then I wanted to do as much as I could to get out in the community. I talked about the engagement. So the first two things I did was I initiated an accreditation process at the Pensacola Police Department. The city's been incorporated since 1821. People have been here since 1559, but we have never been accredited until I was able to get us accredited. Second thing I did was I put body cameras on every police officer. This was a time, a few years ago now, that no area agency had body cameras, and to this day, the Pensacola Police Department, I believe, is the only local agency that has the body camera. So, and by doing that, I wanted people to understand that we have nothing to hide, and that if and we're not perfect. And when we make mistakes, we will correct those mistakes. We will critique those mistakes. But if we're right, we're going to show you that we're right.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you touched on that, because I was going to ask about the body cams and kind of who's policing the police. Who keeps an eye on it, and when someone comes to you with an issue or a problem or complaint, whatever y'all call them, I don't know.
A little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is there any kind of public disclosure of the accountability? But 100%, if it's a body cam type thing, that would come into play.
Right. The sheriff's office doesn't yet have body cameras, but we have in-car videos. And what they do, they also have body mics, so that if you stop your car at a house, you may not be on video, but you may be on audio. So there are some, I call it checks and balances, and that we can go back and review the traffic stop, the demeanor of the deputy, and we can get better by that. And I will tell you, there are times when, when our demeanor is not up to the standards that we set. There are also times when we are absolutely right and someone is misrepresenting the facts on the complaint. But we are obligated to investigate every complaint that we have. There's a state statute that mandates how we take care of that you can't disclose exactly what's going on until it's over. And in law enforcement, like anything in government, almost everything is a public record. I mean, unless there's some sort of surveillance cameras inside or security type things, or juvenile or sexual assault things, everything is public record. So ultimately, the people will have access to review everything that we do, whether it's budgetary, whether it's internal affairs investigations, whether it's training records. Everything that we have is up for public review.
Oh, cool.
And again, I say that to say that we have a process in place. Everything is reviewed. There's a lot of times people talk about the shootings and that they are investigated by a different agency. That's not something that we have to do. It's something that we feel like is a good thing to do, so that another agency, an outside agency, is investigating us on our officer-involved shootings.
So the last couple minutes here is going to be more fun. But actually, before I ask a fun question, is there anything you want to say and a website you want them to go to, anything like that you want to make sure everybody knows that I haven't asked?
Well, I think that what we're doing at the sheriff's office is a little bit more of a robust social media platform, so that people will understand what we have going. We have safety in the place of worship, which we had on Tuesday. So if you are a member of a congregation, or if you're a pastor, or a deacon, or a security team, and you want to come out and you want to hear what some of the best practices that we picked up, come out and do that. We have a Citizens Law Enforcement Academy. We have that 4 times a year. So if you really want to know why a canine comes out, how they alert, what happens on a DUI stop, what happens on the shoot don't shoot scenarios, then we can have those. So we have a number of these things. And then if you have a neighborhood watch or a neighborhood association that you want someone to come speak at, whether it doesn't have to be me, but it could be someone that has an expertise in what we call CEPTED, or crime prevention through environmental design. And we'll have someone come and do a free review of your house and say, hey, you might want to consider this to be less likely to be a victim of a crime.
Did not know that.
So just when people say, we want people to know this stuff.
And they can always, it sounds like then you have a bunch of things that they can get involved in if they want to actually get involved and go listen to you or another deputy speak. And
absolutely. And if you want a job, we're always recruiting.
Oh, good. Good to know.
For deputies and dispatchers.
What's your website? What's your website you have up now?
It's a Facebook. It's Escambia County, ScambiaSO.com,
okay.
Or you just look us up on Facebook. We have both platforms.
Okay. So going back to real quick, it's the county jail oversight. I don't even know. I watched that. Me and my husband watched that 60 Days In. Is that an accurate depiction of, I don't know what they're in, Atlanta jails or whatever. Is that true how, there's gangs within gangs and there's, little things like that? It's fun to watch, but is it true?
I don't know which show you're watching. It's kind of funny that people ask me, did I watch CSI Miami? Do I watch SWAT? Having been on SWAT, I can't stomach it. I can't do it because it's so unrealistic.
Well, that's like me. I don't watch medical shows at all.
Yeah, because they're just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now, if this is a documentary, then a lot of that is accurate. Because they just bring the cameras.
I didn't know if you watched it and had some funny.
I think the closest thing is the cops. Cops, they actually ride with us quite a bit.
I like that live
and
PD.
that kind of stuff.
I watch live PD all the time.
Live PD rides with law enforcement, local law enforcement, so you can get a pretty good feel for what it's like.
I love that too. But so something fun, relatable. How can people relate to Chip Simmons? What's your favorite book? What's your favorite music? What are you listening to now? It's like vacation. What do you do for fun?
Well, I think that we hit a little bit about it. I am a huge college football fan, and when I spend my time, it's so that I can sit back and I can watch a good college football game in the fall, and enjoy some friends over. But
Who's
a lot
your
of
favorite
time,
team?
Notre Dame. No, I know it seems kind of odd, but it's Notre Dame. I like the way they handle business. I think the fact that they make sure that their student athletes are student athletes, and I just like the way they've carried themselves. I was not born in Pensacola. I was born in a military base in Keflavik, Iceland, and my father was born and raised Catholic. So we had a little bit of a Notre Dame fan there, and then of course I've been here for over 50 years. So I consider myself more or less a Southern boy. But if you go back to it, those early impressions of what makes you, we are the sum of our experiences, and that's where I am with regards to sports.
Well, I appreciate you being on here because I just recently relocated back. We've been with the Marine Corps for 30 years and running all around the country. So coming back to Pensacola, I see you everywhere. I see what you do. I see your involvement. I see the great things you're doing for Pensacola and public safety. So that's why this is my first ever podcast, and I was just honored for you to be a part of it and tell us what's going on in Pensacola and keeping us safe. So I have 2 kids here. My husband's here. We're here, and I have a lot of family here. So we appreciate you keeping us safe.
Very good. Thank you.
Just want to say thank you for listening. This is Monica Sanford with Vantage Point. Please look me up on Facebook at Monica Sanford. If you know of any important issues or topics, please let me know. Send me some feedback on my Facebook.